Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm looking at the idea of making good more doable. In other words, helping people to do the right thing. And I'm speaking to someone who has really inspired me. When I was working in a bank and developing the idea of human risk, I was looking for fellow travellers, people who were thinking along similar lines that I could bounce ideas off. That's when I came across a presentation that had been given to the Dutch Behavioural Science Network about developing and rolling out a bank-wide compliance and conduct curriculum that stimulated good ethical conduct and helped to take away some of the root causes of non-compliance, all with the help of behavioural science. Having watched the presentation, you can too, there's a link in the show notes, I got in touch with the presenter Maarten Hoekstra and suggested that we meet up the next time he was in London or I was in Amsterdam. As it happened, shortly after that, I found myself in Amsterdam and managed to meet with Maarten, appropriate enough, in a coffee shop in a glorious space that was once the waiting room in the main train station. A perfect venue then for my first encounter with my fellow traveller. As we shared ideas, it became clear to me that Maarten is not only an innovative thinker, but he's also fantastic at explaining those ideas in a really simple and engaging way. Since then, we've met a few times, and on each occasion, Maarten has inspired, amused, and enlightened me. Given the increasing focus on ethics, I thought it was about time that I had Maarten on the podcast. After all, we can't meet in person at the moment, so why not invite a few more people along to one of our discussions? So please enjoy, as I know you will, my latest conversation with my fellow traveller and friend, Maarten Hoekstra, on making good more doable. Maarten, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Hi, Christian. Good morning.
Hello, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. You and I know each other pretty well, but obviously my listeners might not. So can you give us a little bit of a sense of who you are and what you do?
Sure, I can try. I always struggle with where to start when I introduce myself because I can obviously start with what I do for work, but I'll take a different angle. I'll start with what my mission is, I suppose, and that is to make good more doable, Christian. I hope that makes sense because I think it's very hard. Everybody wants to be good, but it's very hard. For several reasons, I believe it's very hard because, for one, to talk about what is right or wrong is already very quickly becoming an expert discussion. But this is really what we need to be doing if we want to make sure that we know what is right and make the right choices. So this is what I'm really struggling with personally and also professionally, is how to make it more doable to do the right thing. I think about that a lot, and I talk about it a lot with people like yourselves, Christian, to see how we can make that easier, both from a behavioral science perspective, from an ethical perspective, and from a compliance perspective. So I'm looking there to combine different worlds to achieve that mission. I work as a learning and awareness expert. I have a team in financial services to help people do the right thing from a compliance perspective. But I also, outside of my work, try to conceptualize new things to help achieve just that.
Wow. So many amazing things in there. And I love the way you described it, because I think what you get to is the heart of a really important question, which is sort of, how do we get people to do the right things for the right reasons and facilitate that? And then you've got that question as to what is the right thing and how do we get that? And I'm very much struck by when we think about doing the right thing. On the one hand, it's really obvious, right? There are certain situations that are super simple and super obvious where there is a right answer and a wrong answer. Mm-hmm. And then there's other situations that are really difficult and challenging. Right. And you and I have talked before about the sort of the black and the white is how we normally present the world, but actually there's a lot of grey there. And I wondered if you could explore a little bit around your thinking there.
Well, yeah, I think this is the main challenge for us as humans and for also us as risk professionals, is to deal with this ever increasing gray area, because I think most of us will agree that the world is getting more complex by the day. That also means that we are slowly losing our grasp of basically our understanding of this world. And the same goes, I think, for the world of what's right and what's wrong. So many things we have captured in laws and policies and regulations. So that's the black and white stuff. So this is the stuff that we all agree on. You know that you cannot run a traffic light. That's something we all agree on. And we also know that it's very predictable. If you run a traffic light, you're running a bigger risk, and others are running a bigger risk because of you. So it's very predictable and agreed upon what is right and what's wrong. But as the world is getting more and more complex, I think more of the work that we do and more of the decisions that we make are not that black and white. They're not that binary. So that would be the gray area. So as this is increasing tremendously, this domain in our work that is chaotic, if you like, or at least complex, we need to find ways to navigate this gray area and determine together what is right and what's wrong when it's not written down in a policy yet. And there I see that many of my friends and colleagues and also myself could use a little help. Because how do you do that? How do you determine what's right and what's wrong when we don't agree on it yet? A very interesting discussion there is, for instance, we have in the Netherlands is the Black Peat. Have you heard about it? I'm sure you have.
Yes, but tell my listeners, because I think it'd be good for people to hear that.
So we have this centuries-old tradition that on the 5th of December, we celebrate St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas is an old white man with a long beard. It's sort of Santa, but then different. And he has a lot of helpers called Black Peats. So they are painted, their faces are painted black, and they are the helpers of this this old white man. Now you can imagine this could be perceived as not very politically correct, right? So the black helpers are helping the white chief, let's say. So there was a lot of controversy about this whole tradition. Now, as you can imagine, some people, they were really fond of this tradition and said, well, I would not want my children to miss out on this tradition. And I think it should all stay the same. And it is not because of discrimination or because of our significant slavery past. No, this is just as it is. This is just our tradition. And please respect that. And others are obviously saying, look, this is not, why not change it? Why not make colored faces like yellow and purple and blue instead of black? So this was a very interesting discussion where it's very hard to get agreement on what is the right thing to do. I mean, basically it turns out that currently none of the options that we have are perceived as very good. So these kinds of discussions, and this is a very complicated one, I would love to be able to help figure out sort of a common understanding of what is good to do.
Wow. And I think that's a great example, because I have my views on it and I understand why people find it offensive. But the argument that says, well, it's doing a good thing, it's a tradition, and therefore it must be the right one, is quite a common human logic. This is the way we do things, and we shouldn't be messing with tradition. And so there are, intellectually honest arguments on both sides as to why this is a really good idea or a really bad idea. So it comes with a degree of complexity. And I think what's fascinating about the way you were talking there is that you've exposed something which I think is there's almost this sort of simplicity. Some rules are written as if the world is simple, but a lot of the training that people get presupposes that it's very simple. And so I always talk about, financial services examples where it's kind of, people go on training and they're taught what to do if the brother or sister of a client is introduced magically and they have a suitcase full of money, right? Mm-hmm. Really obvious situation where you go, something is not quite right. And and the training is built around this simplistic, sort of training on don't murder people because murder is bad. And that's not the bit, to your point, that's not the bit that people need help with, right?
Absolutely.
We understand those extremities.
Yeah.
Those extremities are not the problem, but we base rules and training around those extremities because that's easy to codify. That's really simple, and I've done my job. Exactly. And the difference between theory and reality, and I see this with policies and regulation, there's something, it looks good on paper, really simple, good stuff. But the practicalities on the ground, the thing that people need help with, the challenges, the difficult bits, the bits that you should be spending the time helping navigate, are these complicated issues like you've just made clear.
Yeah, I also have another example that is, I think, quite common in the financial industry, but also in other industries, and that's gifts and entertainment policies. I think this is a very typical example where we oversimplify the thing that we're trying to solve into a simple rule. It's very binary often, like, can you accept a gift from a client? And then the policy usually states, well, if it's over 75 euros, you cannot. If it's under 75 euros, you can. Something like that, right? It's often very binary. Or you have to register, and then it's all right. But even like that policy is broken in many aspects. Because, for instance, if you look at it from an ethical perspective, like in some cultures, it's very unethical. It's perceived as very unethical to reject a gift, regardless of the price of it, right? So, if in this particular culture, I am required to be compliant to the gifts and entertainment policy and reject a gift when it's presented to me by a client, you're basically telling me to put my compliance over my integrity. And this is something that does not compute with me, because I think, first of all, we need to have integrity. And maybe secondly, we have to also be compliant. So this is where I believe if a policy is asking people to be unethical in their own, from their own perspective, I think something is very wrong. And I'm not saying that I have the answers to this problem, but this is where we are facing really big difficulties, I think, with some of the policies and the oversimplified rules that we tell people.
And the thing I find really interesting is when you talk about this subject, the obvious place where this starts to become a problem that needs to be solved is if you look at things like autonomous vehicles, so self-driving cars, where we have to start making ethical decisions and program on that basis. So it's the classic psychologist's trolley problem. Mm-hmm. What should the car do if it's a choice of killing the person in the car or killing pedestrians? Right. Really uncomfortable subject, but these situations could theoretically arise, and you need to think about it. So in that case, we have to start taking decisions about where we stand on these in a way that we don't in the human world. And in the human world, we kind of fudge it a bit, and we sort of know we put it in the too difficult box. Yeah. And we kind of hope that situation won't arise. And if it does, well, we'll judge it based on the circumstances, and we'll come up with a view. And we don't really guide and help people. We just we'll deal with it afterwards. But of course, in the machine world, you have to program these things. And I think this is a really interesting challenge for the 21st century, where these are no longer theoretical questions that we can sort of park. We actually have to start thinking about them.
But we are so far behind there in the, let's say, let's call it moral science, I suppose. Because really, if we humans are already so bad at making ethical decisions and explaining them, and then I'm not saying that we have very, very good moral intuition and we have good moral reasoning capacities. But when the decisions become a little bit more complex, like the one that you mentioned, we're not particularly good at it. So if we humans are already not so very good at, let's say, codifying our discussions around what's right and what's wrong, and we tend to resort to simplified methods like rules, do this, don't do this, how can we then design machines that do this for us? I mean, I really feel, it's a great example, I really feel like we're far behind there. How can we program the machine to do what we cannot do ourselves? And then it's easy to say, well, machines are very good and artificial intelligence can do stuff that we cannot do. But still, we would need to insert the ingredients so that this machine can do the, let's say, value alignment with us, that we can make sure that this machine is learning by itself how to optimize for, let's say, the common good. But what is the common good? I'm really 100% with you on that this is going to be a very big challenge. Yeah.
What I find fascinating is when I sort of talk to you, is you are addressing the complexity. Yeah. And it's not in a kind of, I have the solution. It's the opposite. It's like, I just want to raise this issue because I think this is important and we need to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, this is too hard, so we're going to ignore it. Right? We're just going to park this stuff and we're not going to expose ourselves to it. And I find it really fascinating because on the one hand, it is really hard, right? My mind gets blown in a really, really uncomfortable way when I go, we need to try and fix this problem. But yet we have set up structures that pretend to solve it. We have, we have laws and we have rules and regulations, and we implicitly accept the negative, the unintended consequences of those because we have to, we have to have that. And it's difficult, right? It's uncomfortable. And that's what I love talking to you about these things, because you accept the uncomfortability.
Yeah.
That's not a word, but you know what I mean.
No, well, let's make it a word. I mean, I love that. So what we often see is we humans, I think, have a need for some comfort, right? So some control over what we're doing. And we want to be good at what we do. So then a little bit of control helps. But what we tend to do sometimes, and me included, right? I mean, is that we, because we see a very complex world that we cannot make sense of, we take a very simplified snapshot of it. Let's say a 2D picture of a 3D world. And this is what we use to build our solutions on. So we take a very simplified model of reality and base our interventions, for instance, on that. And I think this is what we do also when within the compliance world, we tend to over-rely on rules, because rules only work in, let's say, this simplified model. But when you try to apply them to the real world, not to the model of the world, but the real world, then you see that often circumstance shows that this rule is too simple and doesn't work. So there, I think we would need a little bit of different approach to helping people navigate this complexity. And I do love it. I do think we need more doubt in this world, because this is what, if you love to doubt, if you can be very doubtful and you don't mind, then you also have a bit of a bigger tolerance for complexity, I suppose. If you don't like doubting, you just like deciding, this is what I will do, then you also have a bigger need for control and comfort. So I would like to embrace the complexity and love also the dynamic that it gives us and the serendipitous aspects of it.
And that's interesting. I was thinking as you were talking about, we see this in politics, but cults, for example, where it's sort of people buy into something and they just blindly follow. And you can see this, whether you want to talk about Brexit, whether you want to talk about Trump, there's a whole host of examples of people sort of loving simplified solutions.
Yeah.
That don't, and there's plenty of evidence that they get presented with that things aren't as simple as they might point out. Facts, you might call them. Yeah. And yet they just still stick to this thing. And we've, you can sort of see this with the Leon Festinger work around cults. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, about how people buy simple solutions to things, because we human beings naturally programmed, we're cognitively lazy. We like simple solutions to things. And so there is an attractiveness to that.
And we need them. Yeah, because I mean, it would be tempting to say, look, let's not oversimplify things. Just face the complexity and deal with it. But that would mean that we basically cannot leave the house, because every step that we take, we see the full complexity of it, and we doubt. I see a philosopher thinking about, shall I descend the stairs or shall I not do it? So we need these simplifications, right? Otherwise, we cannot navigate this world. It's just that I would love to have to figure out together what parts of our oversimplifications need a little bit of challenge, and are there ways to see the simplicity in the complexity rather to simplify the complexity? Do you know what I mean? There's a subtle difference, but
Yeah. I love
Okay.
that.
I don't think it's. I think some famous scientist said that once. So it's not my. Probably Einstein or something like that. So it's not me.
And look, one of the things that I discovered, in fact, this was how I found you, was you have created what I'll simply call the broccoli model or
Yeah.
approach. And I'd love it if you could explain that, because I think this is really, it's a shame this is an audio podcast, not visual, because you've got some lovely visuals, but I can put links to those in the show notes. But you have this really simple way of talking about this topic that I do want to make sure we've covered.
Yeah, so I'll try to touch upon it a little bit, but it's indeed hard to explain it with audio only. My approach is very visual, as you know. I try to always explain my ideas with a picture. But what the broccoli model basically does is it asks us to think about whether we can maybe reverse our way of approach towards helping people do the right thing. So typically we start with presenting people with rules, or better yet, procedures on how to make sure you do the right thing, right? The system only works if you follow all the steps, and then the outcome can only be that you did the right thing. Or we have a policy that is full of do's and don'ts. Do this, don't do that. But the idea of the broccoli is that this should be the outcome, not the starting point. Because if you present people with rules, do's and don'ts, and these rules present us basically with the answers, right? This is what you can do, this is what you cannot do. These are the answers. But if these are the answers to questions that nobody is asking themselves, they are irrelevant. And I think this is something we see very often, that we have like huge repositories of policies. I think the company I work for, we have 10,000 pages of policies, and this is very common. So they are largely irrelevant if people are not asking themselves the right questions. So the first step in the broccoli, and the first step towards trying to cope with the complexity, is to very simply present people with the questions they should be asking themselves. So to give you an example for this step is, if we have a lot of rules about how we should be informing our clients on a new product, like we have, if you give them a brochure, you should not present the pros in a larger font than the cons of the product, right? Or the introduction should give a fair representation of what the product does. You cannot present it in a better way than it actually is. So there's a lot of rules about how we should be informing clients, but the question underlying this, and the very human question that client-facing professionals should be asking themselves, is, does my client really understand what I just told her? And this is where you already feel like, oh, yeah, this is my responsibility. I really feel why this is important to ask myself this question. And if you start with this question, then I believe the answers and all these rules can help you figure out the answer. But you have to start with the questions. And also, if you look at this very simple question, also obviously has a lot of answers. So there's a lot of do's and don'ts when it comes to answering the question, does my client really understand what I just told her? You see, so this is a very subtle step, but very important in making the step towards your human risk, right? So to make managing risk a little bit more human. Because also, this way you create curiosity. Like professionals, well, all humans actually, I think, when they have a question, they are motivated by curiosity to find the answers. And motivation, I believe, when it comes to compliance and risk management is something that I would love to see more of, right? If we can make our policies more engaging, that would be great. So this is one of the very important steps that I'm trying to achieve in the broccoli model. And then, I'll go very quickly, but the other steps there to simplify things is, of course, it's very important. When do you want people to ask themselves these questions? So what should be the trigger? Because really, if you don't help people trigger on the moments that they should be triggered, they will not have attention. There will not be attention for the thing that you're trying to tell them, right? So just like you would want to have curiosity into the mix to help people do the right thing, you would also want to have people to have attention on the moments that it really matters. So when we inform clients, when we onboard new clients, or when we hire a new employee. Those are all moments that pose risks, that we want people to ask themselves the right questions, and have attention and be motivated to find the answers. So this is very quickly what I'm trying to do in the broccoli model. And then, of course, the outside of the broccoli is the complexity, and the stem of the broccoli is the simple entry point to this complexity. I hope this makes even a little sense.
Makes perfect sense to me. I mean, so just so my listeners can help visualize this thing, what you're basically is, if you take a piece of broccoli, now normally when we examine broccoli, we look at the florets at the top. And what you're basically saying is, if you think about the top of the broccoli is the rules, and that's the bit we normally focus on. And actually, you're saying, what we should do is we activate people through the bottom, through the stem of the broccoli. Let's think about the times and the rules, the bits that we normally focus on at the top are the bits that we do last. And what we should be focusing on is those situations and times. So in other words, we're looking at things the wrong way round. Rather than saying, let's start with this codification, we should start by going, what problems are we trying? When are people going to face challenges? And I love this, because I think it gets to the heart of training, communications, and controls, which is really to say, okay, if we want to get people to do the right thing, do the things we want them to do, not do the things that we don't, we need to be thinking about, when is that going to happen? What are these situations that they'll find themselves in where that becomes relevant? And to your point, because human beings are sentient, we can sense what's going on around. We have curiosity built into us as a species. We need to play with that a little bit and say to ourselves, okay, how do I work with those human dynamics of curiosity, of exploring what's going on, of not being naturally attuned to just slavishly following rules? We do have those dynamics. So what we need to do is we identify those times, and we start with that thing and go, what situations are likely to arise where people are going to, where it's not easy, where they might need some help in situations, or where they might get it wrong. And we build around that. And I love this idea, because that then starts to deliver. When do you deliver training? When do you deliver information to people? How do you deliver that information? How do you awake their interest if they are on autopilot and about to do something that might feel right in the moment, but actually is the wrong thing? And you start to focus around those things. So you're designing your world around the human as opposed to the theory.
So everything that we present colleagues, like as risk professionals, everything we present our colleagues should be linked to their day-to-day work. It should be recognizable moments in their day. Otherwise, you will not win the battle for attention, right? Because we all suffer from severe cognitive overload. So if you just present another e-learning explaining the rules, this will not be a very good proposition, I suppose. So very simply presenting everything in terms of, the starting point or the interface, if you like, to all this knowledge about what's right and what's wrong should be recognizable moments in the day of the person you're trying to reach. And then the second part is, the second step would be then to say, okay, what are the considerations that I would like you to make during these moments? So when you inform a client, I would like you to consider if your client really understands what you just told her. And this is a key as well, because these considerations work both in the black and white area and in the gray area, right? So even if we haven't figured out yet what is the right thing to do, we haven't written a policy yet on what is the right thing to do on a particular moment in a particular situation, these considerations still help us to construct a concept of what we think is right and wrong. And more importantly, it helps us to do this as a collective rather than only as an individual relying on your moral intuition. So if you would be able to follow a process where, together with some people with knowledge of the situation, ask a couple of very good questions, you can basically construct your own rule. And then maybe this rule is not perfect, but at least you can explain that you have had some really good considerations that made you decide this is something that we will do or will not do. And I think that will help people feel more comfortable about the choices that they make. Because really, if you have to rely on your moral intuition only, you might decide, okay, I will do this, but still feel uncomfortable about it. Or you might decide to not do anything at all because you're afraid to do the wrong thing, right?
So I think that's really interesting, Maarten, because there are lots of situations in life where society gets this right. and we are looking to intervene at precisely the right point with really helpful information that is going to help people and support them. And it's almost like it's good design. And a little bit like a product that's well designed, that's easy to use. You can have policies, procedures that reflect the realities you met. There's also lots of examples of the opposite. And I think, when we look at, and I loved your examples around training, where very often we will send people on training courses that are that have the name of the law or the rule as the subject. And you've already framed that discussion around something that doesn't make any sense, because no one wakes up in the morning and says, I wonder what situation I'm in now, which law would apply now. You just want to know what it is you need to do. And I think organizations that frame things around theory are going to miss opportunities to get to people in a way that works for them, to resonate with them. And the bit I find fascinating is that all of this is logical and obvious. If you have what makes people click on things on the internet, what makes people buy products, it's an engagement with human beings that is answering a question that they might have, or prompting them to think about something differently in a way that's relevant to them. And if you advertise products to people in a theoretical way, that doesn't necessarily work. You need to get them on the emotional level. Now, you might use some facts to back it up, but you get them on the emotional level. This washing powder works really well. It's going to make your clothes clean. Here's some science as to why. But it's going to. You wouldn't necessarily start with the theory of washing powder. You find a way to engage with people that gets them on the hook. And I think what's fascinating about policies and procedures and training is very often it doesn't do that. It starts from a theory that you are going to want to know about this law because you're going to want to know about this law because we employ you and we can tell you about these things. And you're a forced consumer of my training. You're a forced reader of my policy. And of course, from a legal perspective, that's correct. You can force people to go on training if you employ them. You can force them to follow the policy. But does that mean that they'll do it when you're not watching? Does that mean that they'll do it well? Yeah. Probably not.
No, I agree. And it also basically implies that we believe in a world where everybody can be two things at the same time. For instance, an employee in a financial services company can be both a commercial professional and be very good at it, and at the same time be a risk professional and be very good at it. And I believe this is not possible. I mean, that's not realistic to expect people to be both. So we should have to be. I think there's an opportunity to translate what we do from in our risk domain and translate it to the human domain and the professional domain of, let's say, the commercial people or the policymakers or whatever is your target audience. And because that's the step that we tend to, forget.
Well, do you think we forget? Or I think that's an interesting question, because I think intuitively what you're just talking about, everybody understands. Mm-hmm. And I'm minded to be a little bit more unkind and say that I think it's ignored, and I think it's consciously ignored. So we know what engages us on a human level in the real world. And for some reason, what happens is then people step into a corporate environment, and all of the normal laws that apply to the way we think somehow get ignored. So you have this distinction between the individual as an individual, mm-hmm. the thing actually that you interview them about, the stuff you talked about before they join. You know, what do you do outside? So talking to people about their hobbies and their interests and their passions and the human side of it. When we do interviews, we talk about the human aspects of it. And then when we hire people, we kind of try and reprogram them and they become an employee. Mm-hmm. And I think there's an interesting distinction between the two things that is so artificial, because actually, particularly in the knowledge economy, you're hiring people for their brains, not for, and therefore, in a way, you're saying the reason I've got you here is because I need you to think. Because if I don't need you to think, I can probably give it to a machine. So I'm giving it to a human being. So I've hired you for your brain capacity. And yet what I'd like you to do implicitly with my policies and procedures and training is to not use that brain, right? Just do what you're told. And I think this is a really, and you've touched a lot in some of the things you've written and talked about around this professional self and personal self. And I'm fascinated by your thinking around that.
Yeah, so as you said, I believe that I was going to use an example that's no longer relevant in COVID times, but I think people will still be able to relate to it, is that when as a human, you get up in the morning and you leave your house and say goodbye to your family. Of course, you already by that time you're probably wearing a suit or some corporate clothes, and then you enter with your badge. You enter the office and you sit behind your desk and start up your computer. Anywhere between leaving the house and entering the office, you've switched from being 100% yourself as a human. So you've left behind your human self a little bit and became a professional self. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean this is very different, right? I mean, I'm not saying that people are all very schizophrenic and have two personalities. That's not what I'm trying to say. But a lot of the things that happen between leaving the house and entering the office help you to distance a little bit more from your human side and become a little bit more of a professional. This is just the frame that you're in. This is the whole environment helps you to get a little bit of a different mindset, a professional mindset. Now, I think this is also necessary because you do need to focus, and it's great if you can do some deep work and not think about your almost 3 months old baby that is lying upstairs, which is the case in my situation. So it does help, but from a moral perspective, you would want this to be synchronized, if you like. So you would want people to uphold the same values that they would do in their family situation when they interact with a client or when they interact with colleagues. You would not want this to be a switch where you can turn off certain very human values and that make it easier to do your job, for instance. So I think ideally you would want your professional self to be a subset of your human self, not something outside of your human self. And I think, again, I'm not saying that this is happening to everybody. I think many people are in a situation where they are very, very well in tune between their professional and personal self. But I do also believe that many things help us to put our human values a little bit more to the background. I mean, even an Excel sheet showing data about clients makes it harder to actually think about the humans that are behind those numbers, right? When we talk about conversion rates, like how many people that enter our website actually buy our product, you're no longer talking about humans, you're talking about numbers. So these are the kinds of things that help us distance ourselves a little bit from our human side, I believe. And again, there's good side to it, but there's also opportunity to keep this more in tune and to remind ourselves of our human values also when we focus on our professional work.
And I think actually, having said that that's not a COVID relevant thing, actually what I think is interesting is I think COVID has illustrated this point in a slightly different way. Sure, we're not going to the office, but that blurring of personal and professional, as many of us are sitting, home, and where's the workspace that's home? Where's the difference between home and the office? And for many people, they sit in the same room for their leisure time and possibly even in front of the same screen as they do for their work time. So that the commute was almost a delineation that sort of facilitated some of these dynamics. Now, I think it's interesting because you've got the overlap between those two things. So there is no longer that distinction between business and pleasure, if you like, or work and professional life, professional life and personal life. And actually, that promotes some interesting dynamics around it, because when we look at, just take an example of getting your employees' attention. One of the things I think is really interesting is because in the workplace, you could sort of go, well, they're stuck here in the office and they're going to have to listen to my dull training, right? And I don't need to pay any attention to this because, frankly, they're just here. I've got a captive audience, right? They're forced to listen to this stuff. It's almost like an airline safety briefing. You are strapped into your seat and you will listen.
Force feeding.
And the bit I find interesting is when I then compare and say, okay, but in the home work environment, the competition for your mind and your eyeballs and your ears is much broader than that. And so I think the benchmark then becomes for things like training is you need to start thinking in terms of Netflix and Peloton and these companies that are really good at engaging us in that environment, who have thought through the psychology of how you can connect with people. Because actually, those are, in a way, that's what you're up against. If you want to grab people's attention in that domestic environment, I think you need to up your game. We need to be thinking in terms of these pieces. You no longer have that captive audience because they haven't made that mindset switch in the same way. So I think it's something we should have been doing anyway. But I think it's really interesting that if I'm, what engages me in my home environment? Well, I'm not going to buy a service from somebody that's boring me. A Netflix that was full of boring stuff isn't going to sell any subscriptions. And I start to look at it and go, that I think there's a starker contrast now because you haven't got this distinction between the physical environment at home and the physical environment in the office. This hybrid world actually means we all need to up our game a little bit and therefore think along the lines that you're saying.
Yeah, so I agree with you, but only partly, because I do believe that we risk professionals and compliance professionals can be more captivating. I do think we can make our training and everything that we do more attractive. Well, there's a lot to win there, I believe. But really, I don't want to go towards a world where everything that is important should be made fun or should be made engaging. I don't believe we should go towards a model where we make it very attractive for people to do the right thing, because very often it's not. And I believe that if we rely too much on creating, let's say, artificial motivators like gamification or Netflix kind of things, then in absence of these artificial motivators, people are maybe even less likely to be motivated to do the right thing than if we would not have introduced these concepts through these kinds of motivating techniques. I hope you see what I'm trying to get at. I'm basically trying to say that to do the right thing is important, and we can help people see that. But inherently, people do see that. That people have moral intuition, and most of the people that I know are good people, so they have motivation to do it. We can tap into that motivation, and maybe that should be enough, even if good is a little bit hard. Maybe that's sometimes okay. Now I also know that people can be morally depleted if it's too good to do the right thing. At some point, your repository of goodness is empty. So it doesn't mean that we should make it very hard, but I hope you see what I mean, that we should not only rely on making it more attractive and captivating.
I agree with that completely. And my point isn't that you sort of have to go, okay, this technique works for this is how Netflix gets eyeballs. This is how we make, and therefore we just have to do that for every single topic. I agree. My point is more, if you start to look at what makes them successful, is they understand the psyche of human beings and they've thought about their audience. So the fact that the way they present TV shows to you, the fact that the next show starts before the previous one is finished, trying to keep you on watching. They've thought about the audience they're trying to engage with. Now, you're absolutely right. When you're doing compliance training, for example, the objective here isn't to be a Netflix rival or competitor, and that you try and you don't turn everything into a game show. Don't turn everything into a kind of, cartoons aren't the answer to everything. But I think having an understanding of those are the things that work and thinking, how can I apply this in the field that I'm in? And I loved your point about actually, we don't necessarily always want life to be incredibly simple and easy, because that's when autopilot kicks in. So we need to kind of work out what is going to make people do the right thing. What are those levers and triggers that we can use? And so when I talk about taking inspiration from those other providers, I'm thinking about it in terms of the fact that they're successful precisely because they've thought about this stuff. And if we want to engage people, we need to do the same thing. And you're right. Sometimes actually we need to make things harder. And I think there's an interesting, let's make processes slicker and quicker. Well, we all know what happens if you make it slicker and quicker, is people just click, click, click through. Now, maybe that's what you want. Maybe you do want that really, really easy. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to slow it down. I did an interview with Roger Dooley, who's written a book on friction. It's one of the earlier podcasts in this series. And so, his piece is, we need to look at, if we are making things harder for people, there is sometimes really good reason for doing it. And we should stick to that. Maybe we need to make it even harder. And if we think about, you don't want someone just to be able to press a button that launches a nuclear missile, to choose a silly example. There needs to be some thought around that so that you don't accidentally do something you don't want to do, or, that you've thought about it before you do it. But there's other examples where we want to, it's unintentionally hard for people. And I think thinking about what does this process feel like? What am I asking the person to go through? And what situation might they be in when they're doing it? What mental state might they be in? Is very important. And so my point around the Pelotons and the Netflixes as well is not copy what they do, but think about the same dynamics that they're thinking about. And how does those things apply? And if you may want to do exactly the opposite of what they're doing, but know why you're doing it. And I think very often when we introduce policies, procedures, and training, we just roll out the same stuff that we've done before without thinking about, is this meeting the objective? Is this delivering to the people on the ground?
Yeah. No, so we have to figure out what part of our risk domain needs simplification and make it basically easier to digest, and which parts we want to intentionally keep hard. And there, I think we also can link this to what we discussed earlier with the black and white area and the gray area. I think the black and white area of, let's say, the world of what is right and what's wrong, maybe there we would want to make things a little bit more easy, right? This is basically your license to operate. So we'll make it in a way that it's not very hard to follow your license to operate. But especially for the gray area there, I think, we can look at making it a little bit easier to navigate the gray area, but some situations are complex. So we also want them to be hard. And I also believe in terms of motivation, I think this is from the sports psychology, you can also help people to achieve a state of flow where there's a good balance between the complexity of the tasks and the capability of the person. So if maybe our ambition should be to match the complexity of what we present in our training and everything that we do, match it to the capability level of the person that we're trying to reach, and not make it too complex, but also not make it too simple. Because then, if you have a good mix, then people will be motivated, and even if it's hard.
And I love that, because I think that's exactly the point, right? If you look at computer games, right, you don't just have one level. You have a level that works for people that are playing it for the first time. But if that was the only level you had, you get bored. So you don't want to have people starting the game on level 100 because that's too difficult. Equally, you don't want the game that just stops at level 1. And that's why these things ramp up. Because when you talked about sort of level of detail, I think one of the things that's interesting is that we have historically had to target training and information in a kind of, one size fits all. But we're not all the same. Some people are very visual learners. Some people love detail. Other people don't. There are topics that interest some people, and there's topics that really don't interest others. And I think what we've got with the opportunity with digital is to really start thinking about these things and going, actually, I can find different ways to engage with my audience. There are some people that want to read the detailed policy. Mm-hmm. They love this stuff. So I would say for those people, make the policy available and accessible, and they can have a look if that's how they want to solve the problem. Other people are not interested in reading long books, and they want quick solution. What do I need to do? And I think we have the opportunity now with digital to start balancing some of these pieces and to think about that bit. And I think that's the other thing that COVID starts to expose is we're starting to get a grip for working patterns. And you have a little bit more flexibility around when you work, because you're not necessarily, there are lots of roles where you have got sort of office hours and you need to be, you're trading on a market or your customer service or something. But for many other people, there's a bit of flexibility there. And you start to see when am I more in the groove? And when do I work best? And I think organizations, we can start, digital gives us a real opportunity to start thinking about, let's find ways that we can engage with people. And if we can find a way, and that's a cultural question, that's a personality type question, there are going to be different answers for different people. And we have the option, if we just to start thinking about these things, so we don't have to deliver stuff. Because, one of the things that's interesting about advertising is they sort of know they can see whether a campaign's successful. You don't always know exactly why it's landed or who it's. And what's interesting, there's a lot of wasted effort there. Now, the difference between advertising thing is if I can get a whole load of people to buy my product, get more people to buy products, a good thing. Compliance, sometimes we need everybody, or we need almost everybody to be doing something. And in those cases, actually trying targeted approaches to get to different people in different ways might be a more successful way of thinking about this. So I'm really excited about when we start to think, there's a whole lot of work to work out how we actually do this, and we could make this a really impossible task. But I think there's a lot of opportunity here to just think a little bit differently about how we target things to really get to the human beings. And if we're trying to get diversity and inclusion, we're going to have people with different perspectives and different ways of looking at things. And if we're communicating with them in ways that don't resonate, we're going to fail in that objective because we're going to find they're not doing the things that we want them to do.
Right. Now, I'm going to say something crazy, Christian, because I really relate to what you were saying. You said this the human aspect is right. Right. So I have a sort of a code in my head. Am I already sounding crazy?
No. Keep going.
But I have a code, and I look at everything that we do, and also this discussion sometimes through this code. And this code basically helps me to look at risk from different angles. So you can look at it as a cube, right? A cube has six sides. Right. So whatever we do, when we talk about a certain risks, you can look at it from different perspectives. You can look at it from the perspective of the rule that is involved, the do's and the don'ts. And you can also look at it from the perspective of the moments in the day of an employee. So when is this rule relevant? Alternatively, you can also look at it from the perspective of who. So for who is this rule relevant? Or turn it around again and look at it from why is it so relevant? Why is this risk such a risk? And why is it potentially bad or good for certain people? Which values are at risk here, for instance? So I hope I'm already starting to sound a little bit less crazy. Because this is, I think, what you're also trying to say is that we should look at the interface to risk and align it with our audience. What is the interface towards the risk that we want to use when we want to help our colleagues and our friends to do the right thing? And sometimes that's the angle of the policy, like you said. Sometimes it's the angle of maybe the spirit of the policy, so the interests that you serve if you do this well. You see, so that is what I think we risk professionals should be playing with a little bit more. What is the angle that we take? And this is exactly, like you said also, this is also what's being done in marketing, right? So what is the angle that is most relevant for the audience that you're trying to reach?
Love it. Look, I could keep talking to you forever, and we normally do, Maarten, but sadly, podcasts have to come to an end. So, look, I want to say, thank you so much. You were one of the people that really inspired what I do at Human Risk, and there's always things that you put out and say that seem smart in the moment and even smarter afterwards and even more thought-provoking. And I love the fact that you are not coming with solutions, you're coming with really smart questions that you then try and solve with other people's help. So I'm going to encourage everybody who is in the slightest bit interested in this to follow you on social media and pay close attention to the things that you're saying, because you really inspire me to kind of think about things differently. And so, I'm delighted to know you and have spent time with you before, but I'm even more delighted that I was able to share that with my listeners on the podcast. So thank you so much for appearing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really loved it.
So that's it for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Maarten for appearing and to you for listening. If you want to find out more about Maarten's ideas and to watch that presentation that I referenced in the introduction, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the main podcasting platforms. If you like the show and haven't yet left a review for it, please do leave a 5-star rating on whichever platform you use. It really does help. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Human Risk Podcast. But in the meantime, if you need more human risk related content, visit human-risk.com for details of the newsletter, the video channel, and other resources on human risk related topics. I'll be back very soon with another episode, so in the meantime, please stay safe, try to make good more doable, and above all, thanks for listening.